There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a man when the world shifts under him without warning. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of grief, but something stranger and more disorienting than either. The silence of realizing the story you thought you were living isn't the story being written about you. I rode into the Callaway spread with 43 cents in my pocket, a borrowed saddle, and the kind of pride that men in my position carry like a hidden wound pressed deep, invisible to most, but aching every time something rubs against it wrong. I wasn't asking for charity. I want you to understand that from the beginning. I was asking for work. There is a difference. A man asking for charity extends his hand palm up and waits. A man asking for work extends his hand palm out and offers something. I was offering something. 12 years of range experience, a back that hadn't broken under any load yet, and hands that knew the difference between a horse in pain and a horse being difficult. What I was not offering, what I had not even considered offering, was myself. She had other ideas. And the strangest part, the part that I still turn over in my mind on long nights when the fire burns low and the coyotes go quiet, is that by the time I understood what was happening, I wasn't sure anymore which of us had been ambushed by the other. This is the story of the Callaway Ranch, of Alina Callaway, who smiled like a woman who had already read the last page of a book you hadn't started yet. Of the Apache tracker named Speaks Twice, who saw everything before any of us did and said exactly half of what he knew. And of me, Thomas Aldred Marsh, 34 years old, sun-worn, perpetually underfunded, keeper of a battered journal that I've filled and refilled since I was 17, stumbling into the most complicated season of my life while thinking I was just looking for a job. You want to know how it started? I said, give me a chance to work here. She smiled, and I mean she truly smiled, the kind that carries weather in it, warm and changeable and secretly dangerous, and said, I'm not looking for a worker, I'm looking for a husband. And everything I thought I knew about myself stood very still for a moment, like a horse at the edge of a drop it didn't see coming. Then I opened my journal and wrote, Lord help me, I think I'm in trouble. I was right, but not in the way I thought. The morning I arrived at Callaway Ranch, the land itself seemed undecided. The sky to the west was the pale, washed-out blue of a thing that had been rained on too recently to trust, and to the east it was still holding onto the last purple bruise of dawn, not quite ready to commit to a full day. A red-tailed hawk circled once over the main house and then banked south, as if it had reconsidered. I took that as neither a good sign nor a bad one. I was past reading omens by then. A man who has been turned away from 11 ranches in 4 months learns to stop looking for meaning in birds. I had ridden through the night from Tierra Blanca, where the last foreman, a thick-necked man named Purdy who smelled permanently of tobacco and suspicion, had looked at my hands, looked at my face, looked at the state of my horse, and told me they were fully staffed. There were 3 idle hands leaning against the fence behind him when he said it. I wrote that down in my journal that evening. Purdy lied. The hands were idle. The real reason is one he wouldn't say aloud. Filed under, things men do instead of having conversations. I keep a personal log. Have since I was 17, when my mother gave me a blank-paged book for my birthday and told me a man who doesn't write down what happens to him is a man who will repeat his mistakes until he dies. I've filled 9 of them. The current one was 2/3 full and getting tattered at the spine, and I'd started writing smaller to make it last because I wasn't sure when I'd be near a town large enough to sell blank books. The Callaway spread announced itself before I could see the buildings, by smell first, which was good hay and recent rain on dark soil, and then by sound, which was the low, collective noise of healthy cattle doing nothing in particular. Healthy cattle have a sound to them that's different from cattle under stress. It's a bass hum, almost musical, the sound of animals that are eating well and not afraid. I noted that. A ranch that keeps its cattle calm usually has someone at the top who pays attention. What I saw when the tree line broke was a main house in better repair than I expected, 2 long bunkhouses set at angles to catch the shade, a barn that was large and properly ventilated. I could see the airflow in the way the hay dust drifted at the upper vents, and 4 corrals, 3 of which held horses. Good horses. Not showy, not bred for anything except work, but the kind of animal that would be there when you needed it and would still be there after. I stopped my horse at the gate and took off my hat, partly out of respect and partly to push the sweat off my forehead with my sleeve, and I looked at the place for a long moment. 12 years of drifting between ranches had given me an eye for the ones that were in trouble versus the ones that were merely busy. This one was busy. The fences along the road were maintained, not just patched. The water trough by the gate was full and clean. Someone was running this place with intention. I put my hat back on and rode through. The first person I saw was the Apache. He was sitting on a fence rail at the side of the largest corral, not doing anything in particular that I could identify, watching a young roan mare that was moving in slow circles inside the pen. He was perhaps 50, lean in the way that desert men go lean, not hungry thin, but stripped down to what was necessary, the way a good knife is stripped down to what it needs to be. He wore a plain cotton shirt, dark trousers, and a hat that had been American-made but had been worn long enough that it had become its own thing entirely, shaped by the man rather than the maker. He glanced at me once as I rode past, then looked back at the mare. I touched my hat brim. "Morning." "Morning," he said, then, "She'll know you're here before you reach the house." I slowed my horse. "Pardon." "Senora Calloway." He still hadn't looked at me again. "She knows when someone new comes through the gate, it's a talent she has." "You speak for her often." "I speak for myself," he said. "I'm telling you something useful, whether you hear it is your business." I wrote that down later. Word for word, I wrote Apache Tracker at the South Corral fence, didn't introduce himself. Said something I didn't fully understand at the time, but which I suspect I will understand too well eventually. His name, I learned much later, was Speaks Twice. Not a formal Apache name, or rather, it was a name he had chosen to give to those who weren't within his full trust, a kind of alias that also functioned as a warning. He said things twice because people rarely heard correctly the first time. He had been with the Calloway Ranch for 6 years, hired by Alina's husband before the man died, and he had stayed on because, as he told me much later, in a tone that made it impossible to tell if he was being sincere or sardonic, the cattle needed me more than I needed to be anywhere else. The main house had a wide, covered porch that ran the full length of the front face, and there was a woman on it. She was standing at the far end, half turned away, watching something out across the north field that I couldn't see from the gate angle. She was perhaps 30, perhaps 35. I never did get a firm answer on that, and I eventually stopped asking because she looked at me a certain way when I did, the kind of look that says you've asked me the wrong thing and we both know it. She wore working clothes, not dressed-up clothes. A plain dark skirt, a cream blouse with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and boots that had been expensive once and were now just functional. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a way that said she'd done it quickly this morning and not thought about it since. She turned when I was still 10 feet from the porch stairs, which meant Speaks Twice had been right. She'd known I was coming. "You're not from around here," she said, not unfriendly, observational. "No, ma'am, Thomas Marsh. I've been working the ranges in New Mexico Territory and Texas for 12 years. I heard you might be looking for hands." She studied me for a moment in a way that was more thorough than it appeared, the kind of look that moves across a person without seeming to, taking inventory. I noticed that her eyes were a particular shade of dark brown that was almost amber at the edges, the color of creek water in autumn, and I noticed that I had noticed this, which I found mildly irritating. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Man at the general store in Tierra Blanca. Said the Calloway spread was always looking for experienced men." "Pete Hansen," she said, and something moved through her expression, not quite amusement, not quite exasperation, but something that contained both. "Pete Hansen has been telling people that for 3 years, ever since I bought him a cup of coffee, and thanked him for sending me a man who turned out to know how to fix a windmill pump. He seems to believe he's my personal employment agent now. He spoke highly of you." "Pete speaks highly of anyone he owes a kindness to." She tilted her head slightly. 12 years, that's a long time to be moving between ranches. What makes you stay nowhere?" That was a sharper question than I'd expected, and it landed differently than I wanted it to. I'd gotten used to foremen asking about experience, about specific skills, about whether I could handle a rough drive or manage green horses. This was a different kind of question. It was asking something about character, or about whatever it is in a man that decides to keep moving instead of put down roots. "I've been looking for a place worth staying," I said. "And you haven't found one?" "Not yet." She was quiet for a moment. A gust of wind came across the yard and lifted a little dust from the dry path between the corrals, and somewhere in the barn a horse shuffled and was still. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Marsh," she said. I have hands. I have enough hands for the ranch work we're doing. What I'm short on, what I've been short on for 2 years, is someone with real management experience. Someone who can be trusted with decisions when I'm not there to make them. My foreman, Brecht, left in the spring. I haven't replaced him, because the men I've had apply for the position have all had one quality in common. Which is, they assumed I would stay out of their way once I hired them. She said it evenly, without heat, but with the particular kind of patience that has been practiced into shape over a long time. I don't stay out of the way. This is my ranch. I built what's here. I have opinions about how it runs, and those opinions are frequently correct, and I will voice them regardless of whether the man I'm talking to is comfortable hearing them. That seems reasonable, I said. Something shifted in her expression. A faint tightening, then a release, like a thing that had been braced and found it didn't need to be. Most men tell me it's reasonable, and then spend the next month trying to work around it. Then most men are wasting everyone's time, including their own. She looked at me for another moment. Then she did something unexpected. She almost smiled. Not quite. It was the gesture that precedes a smile, the brief restructuring of the face that is considering the possibility. "Come inside," she said. "I'll get you some coffee and we can talk properly." I followed her in, ducking slightly through the doorway because the frame was built for a shorter era, and I noted the interior of the house the way I always note spaces, not architecturally, but humanly. What a place looks like when someone actually lives in it, as opposed to what it looks like when it's been dressed up for presentation. The Calloway house looked like a person who had more thoughts than time to organize them. Bookshelves overfull, a second chair pulled to the desk that had papers on it arranged in the chaotic order of actual use. A coffee cup from this morning still sitting on the windowsill, forgotten and now cold. A child's drawing framed on the wall near the kitchen door, badly proportioned horses on a hillside, done in a child's earnest and inaccurate style, clearly cherished enough to have been put in glass. I didn't ask about the drawing, not then, but I filed it. She poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting on the wood stove long enough to be strong, and she set 2 cups on the kitchen table, and we sat down across from each other, and she said, "Tell me something you've done that you're proud of." I thought about it honestly instead of reaching for the easy answer. Took a remuder of 40 horses across the Canadian River in flood conditions. Lost 2. Everyone told me afterward that losing 2 was a miracle. I only felt good about the 38. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Why? Because the 2 that didn't make it had families who counted on them. The rancher's youngest boy had named one of them, called him October. He was 7. He understood what happened. I paused. Didn't feel like a miracle. Felt like 2 horses that deserved better. She was quiet for a moment in a different way than she'd been quiet before. A more interior quiet. "That's a very specific answer," she said. "You asked for something real." "I did." She took a sip of coffee. "My husband used to say that the measure of a man in this work isn't the disasters he avoids. It's how he talks about the disasters he couldn't." "Your husband," I said carefully, "he's not here now." "He's been gone 2 years." She said it with the clean precision of something that has been said so many times it has worn smooth at the edges, like a stone in a riverbed, not unfeeling, just frictionless. She had made peace with the fact of it, if not always with the weight of it. Fever. Quick, at least. "I'm sorry." She looked out the window. "It left me with 400 head, 3,000 acres, 6 hands, an Apache tracker who tells me things in riddles, and a house that needs the south roof replaced before winter." She looked back at me. "It also left me with a daughter who is 11 years old and smarter than anyone in this county, and who has opinions about everything, including the men I hire." "She's the one who drew the horses," I said. Elena Calloway looked at me sharply. "The frame by the kitchen door," I said. "The horses on the hill. You put it in glass, which means you look at it regularly, which means she matters to you the way things only matter when you can't have them be children forever." Something happened in her face that I didn't have a word for at the time. I wrote about it that night, sat with my journal in the bunkhouse where Brecht's old room had been cleared for me, and tried to describe it. What I wrote was, she looked at me the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find. Not surprised exactly, more like recognized. She said, "Her name is Nora. She'll want to meet you. I'd advise honesty with her and patience in that order." "I can do that." "She'll test you. 11-year-olds generally do." She looked at me again. That same thorough look moving across me without appearing to. And then she said something that I was not prepared for, something that arrived with the easy confidence of a woman who had decided, and who knew the value of not being indirect about her decisions. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I want to be honest with you about something, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended, which is practical rather than forward." "All right. I'm not primarily looking for a foreman." She set down her coffee cup with a small, definitive click. "I need one genuinely. I need someone who knows this work, but that's not the larger need. The larger need is a partner, someone who will be here in the full sense of being here. The ranch, the house, the daughter, someone who can make decisions alongside me rather than for me or under me." She paused. "I've thought about this carefully for 2 years, and I've decided that being indirect about it is a waste of everyone's time. So I'm telling you directly." The kitchen was very quiet. "You're saying," I said after a moment. "I'm saying I'm not looking for a worker," she said. "I'm looking for a husband." And she smiled, and I want to be careful here because that smile is important. She smiled the way a woman smiles when she has said a true thing and is not apologetic about it, and is also, very slightly, curious to see what happens next. I looked at my coffee cup. I looked at the window. I looked at the frame with the badly drawn horses on the wall by the kitchen door. I said, "Mrs. Calloway, I've been riding for 3 days and I smell like my horse, and I have 43 cents to my name." "I know," she said. "I can see all of that." "And you're telling you clearly so that you can make a choice with full information," she said. "You can decide it's strange and ride on. That's a legitimate choice. Or you can stay and we can see what there is to see. Either way, I have no interest in pretending I didn't say it." I sat with that for a long time. Long enough that outside the window I could see Speaks Twice moving across the yard toward the barn, unhurried, carrying nothing, which meant he was going to check on something no one had asked him to check on, and I realized that was probably what he always did. I picked up my coffee cup and took a long drink of the very strong, somewhat bitter coffee. "I'd like to earn my keep before I complicate anything," I said. She nodded. "That's fair." "And I'd like to meet Nora." "Also fair." "And I'd like to sleep for about 10 hours. She almost smiled again. This time it got a little further. "Brecht's old room is cleared. Second bunkhouse, far end. There's a hook on the door and a window that sticks in the winter but is fine for now." I stood up and took my hat off the table where I'd set it. "Mrs. Calloway," I said, "I'm not sure I'm what you're looking for." "No one ever is," she said, "until they are." I walked out into the yard, and the morning had fully committed itself now. No more purple bruise to the east, no more undecided sky. Just full day, open and honest and inconveniently bright. Speaks Twice was coming back out of the barn, and he glanced at me with the specific expression of a man who has already guessed what happened in the kitchen and is not particularly surprised. "Well," he said. "I'm staying," I said, "for now." He nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd calculated earlier. "There's a fence on the north line that's been needing work for a month," he said. "I'll show you in the morning." "I thought you weren't a fence man." "I'm not," he kept walking. "But you are." I stood in the middle of the yard with my battered hat in my hand and the sun pressing down on my shoulders. And I thought about the story I thought I'd been riding into: a job, wages, a foreman's bunk, and the story that was apparently already underway, the one I hadn't written the beginning of and wasn't sure I knew how to navigate. I opened my journal that evening and wrote, smaller than usual to conserve space. Day 1 at Calloway, strong coffee, good cattle, strange Apache who knows more than he says, a woman who speaks in straight lines and expects you to walk them, and a drawing of horses that shouldn't be on a wall this fine but is anyway because she loves it. I don't know what's happening. I think I need to stay long enough to find out. The coyotes started up that night around midnight, the way they always do when the temperature drops and they stop pretending to be patient. And I lay in Brecht's old bunk and listened to them and thought about 43 cents and a borrowed saddle and the particular amber color of creek water in autumn, and I did not sleep for anywhere near 10 hours. But I stayed. Nora Calloway came to find me at 6 in the morning on my 3rd day. I was at the north fence. The one Speaks Twice had shown me with the wordless efficiency of a man who has identified a problem and is content to let someone else solve it, replacing a run of wire that had gone slack and rusted through in 3 places. It was cold work. The posts were good, old cedar that had been sunk deep enough to not move, but the wire between them had been neglected for longer than a season, and it showed. I'd been at it since before light, because I'd woken at 4:30 and hadn't been able to get back to sleep, and had found that doing something useful was better than lying in a bunk examining my recent decisions. I heard her before I saw her, the soft, irregular rhythm of a horse being ridden by someone who is comfortable but not in a hurry. Then she came around the scrub oak at the fence corner, riding a bay pony that was clearly hers in the specific way that animals become specific to people, shaped by each other's habits and preferences, and she pulled up about 20 feet away and looked at me. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's way of looking at things without seeming to, that thorough inventory-taking assessment. But where Alina's expression moved through careful patience and practicality, Nora's moved through something more turbulent and more honest. Open curiosity, a readiness to be offended, and underneath both, something watchful and a little wounded that I recognized without knowing yet what had made it. She was 11, as Alina had said, and she was wearing a canvas riding jacket 2 sizes too large that had clearly been her father's. She said, "You're the new one." "Thomas Marsh," I said. I kept working the wire. I'd learned, from years of working around children and animals both, that looking directly at something that's deciding whether to trust you is the fastest way to push it away. "Mama said you might be staying." "That's the current plan." "She said that about the last 2. I glanced up briefly. "What happened to the last 2? "One left because she told him how to mend tack and he took it personally." She said this with the brisk, factual tone of someone reporting on weather. "The other one, Hicks, she let go because he was unkind to one of the horses." "Which horse?" "Paloma, the gray mare." "What did he do?" Nora considered for a moment, as if deciding whether I'd earned the information. "He hit her on the nose when she turned away from his hand." "Not hard, but hard enough." She paused. "Mama saw." "What happened?" "Hicks was paid to the end of the week and given until morning to be off the property." She said it with a satisfaction that was not quite cold, but was not warm either. The satisfaction of justice, which at 11 can look like a lot of things. Mama is patient about almost everything except that. Being unkind to animals. Being unkind, she said the word in a way that expanded it. Full stop. I finished the section I was working on and moved down the fence line. She rode alongside on the other side of the wire, her pony ambling. "So you're testing me," I said. "I'm learning about you," she said. "There's a difference." Your mother said the same thing. Essentially. Something moved through her face, not quite a smile, but a flash of something. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "What do you write in that?" she asked. I'd set my journal on the fence post within reach, the way I always do, not even thinking about it anymore. "Things I want to remember." "Like what?" "Like what the cattle sound like when they're healthy. Like what a bad foreman looks like so I recognize it. Like conversations I want to think about later." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you write about people?" "Sometimes." "What would you write about me?" I kept working. "That you came to find me instead of waiting for me to come to you. That you wore your father's jacket. That you know the name of every horse on this property and what each one is afraid of." Another silence. When I glanced up, she was looking at me with an expression that was different from the testing look, something more open and slightly uncertain, like a door that has come ajar. "I do know what they're afraid of," she said. "How did you know that?" "You mentioned the gray mare by name and you mentioned what upset her. People who know what animals are afraid of learned it by paying close attention over a long time." I shrugged. "That's not a small thing." "Mama says it's a useful skill." "Your mama is right." She rode alongside me in silence for another stretch of fence, her pony flicking its ears at something in the brush, unconcerned. Then she said, "Are you going to stay?" "I plan to." "That's not the same as staying." "No," I agreed, "it's not. Everyone who leaves says they plan to stay." She said it without self-pity, which somehow made it heavier. I stopped working and looked at her properly. She held my gaze, which took some doing. She was 11, and I was sun-worn and travel-scarred and not particularly friendly-looking under any circumstances. But she held it. I don't know yet if I'm staying for good, I told her. That's the honest answer. I don't know your mother, I don't know this land, I don't know whether I fit here. What I can tell you is that I don't leave without saying so. I don't disappear in the night. If I go, you'll know I'm going, and you'll know why. I paused. That's what I can promise. She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked away across the field. Papa didn't say goodbye, she said. He didn't get to, the fever was fast. I know, I'm sorry. He would have. She said it with a certainty that was the saddest kind, the certainty of a child about a parent who isn't there to confirm or disappoint. He would have said something important. He always knew what to say. I picked up my wire pliers and went back to work. Write that down, she said after a moment. What? What I just told you, about Papa. Write it down so someone else knows it. I stopped, I pulled out the journal and I wrote it down right there, leaning against the fence post. I wrote, Nora Calloway, 11 years old. Her father would have said something important. He always knew what to say. Then I held the journal out to her across the top of the fence wire. She read it, she handed it back. She said, thank you, and then turned her pony and rode back toward the house without looking back. I stood at the north fence in the cold morning and thought about fathers who would have said something important, and about all the things that fever takes away before they can be said, and I went back to the wire. The Apache tracker found me at the South Corral that evening. I'd been there an hour, watching the same roan mare he'd been watching my first morning. She had a hitch in her right foreleg that wasn't a break and wasn't a sprain but was something in between, something she was compensating for in a way that would cause longer damage if it wasn't addressed. I'd been trying to understand whether she'd allow me close enough to feel for it. Speaks Twice sat on the rail beside me without preamble. She doesn't trust easily, he said, the mare. I noticed. She was handled badly when she was young, before she came here. She'll let me close if I give her enough time. He nodded slowly. Most things will. We sat for a while in the way that men who work with their hands can sit, not uncomfortably, not with the anxious need to fill silence that city people have, but in the easy way of people who spend most of their time in large, quiet spaces and have learned to be inside it. You knew my husband, I said, and then caught myself. It was the construction Alina had used my husband, and I'd borrowed it without thinking. I started again. You knew Mr. Calloway. James, he said. He didn't like the formality. What was he like? Speaks Twice considered this in the careful way he considered everything, as if the words needed to be selected from a larger supply, and the wrong ones would do damage. He was a man who knew what he had, he said finally. That's rarer than people think. Most men know what they don't have. James knew what he had, and he said so every day. He paused. It made Alina better at knowing it, too. I absorbed that. And now she works, he said. She works the way people work when they're trying to stay ahead of grief. She runs this ranch like a woman who is afraid that if she stops moving, the thing she's been running from will catch up. He glanced at me sideways. She's not wrong to be afraid of it, but it's also not something you can outrun. Is that why you told her to hire a husband instead of a foreman? He turned to look at me directly, which was the first time he'd done that. His eyes were dark and deeply settled, the eyes of a man who has seen most of the things the world has on offer and filed them accurately. She told you that herself. I had no part in it. But you knew she would. I had a guess. And you sent me toward the house, instead of telling me to ride on. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I've seen men ride through that gate for 6 years, looking for work, looking for shelter, looking for easy money. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. You were the first one who took his hat off at the gate before he even knew if anyone was watching. He turned back to the mare. Small thing, but small things are usually the real things. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which seemed correct. After a moment, Speaks Twice said, She'll let you close tomorrow, the mare. Come at first light and stand at the fence without moving. Bring nothing in your hands, give her time. How much time? As much as she needs. He climbed down from the rail and walked back toward the barn, unhurried, his shadow long in the evening light. The work was genuine. I want to be clear about that because it would be easy to tell this story in a way that makes the ranch seem like backdrop to something more personal, and it was not backdrop. It was the thing itself. The cattle needed moving to the eastern pasture before the season turned and the grass went dry. 3 of the horses needed attention to their feet. A farrier was coming in 2 weeks, but 2 weeks was too long for one of them, a big sorrel with a crack starting in his left front hoof. The south roof that Alina had mentioned in the kitchen needed not just repair but partial replacement, and I wasn't a carpenter, but I knew enough to understand what the weather would do if it wasn't handled before November. I worked in the way I always work when I'm in a place I'm not sure I belong, thoroughly and without pausing to think about whether I belong, because the thinking is the enemy of the working, and the working is the only honest argument I have for my own presence anywhere. Alina watched, not in a hovering way, she had too much of her own work for hovering. But she watched in the way the Apache tracker watched, moving through the property with apparent purpose in another direction, but taking in everything peripherally, cataloging. On the 4th day, she came to the south roof, where I was working alongside a young hand named Cal who had cheerful incompetence in carpentry and was genuinely trying to compensate for it with enthusiasm. Alina handed us both water, looked at what we'd done, and said, "The ridge is going to need to come up about 2 inches on the left side." Cal looked at me, I looked at the ridge, she was right. "She's right," I told Cal. "Figured," he said, and started adjusting. Alina looked at me. "You could have argued." "I could have. Would have been wronged. Most men argue first. Most men waste time that way." I took a drink of the water. "You're good at this. At carpentry. At knowing what needs doing and saying it without dressing it up." She was quiet for a moment. "James used to tell me I wasn't soft enough about it, that I should," she stopped. "Say it nicer." "He didn't mean it badly. He worried people were put off." She looked at the roof. "He was sometimes right about that. And sometimes wrong. And sometimes wrong." She looked at me. "He was a good man. He wasn't always right. Most good men aren't." She nodded once slowly, and took the water jar back and walked away down the ladder in the easy way of a woman who has been climbing ladders her whole life and doesn't think of it as anything. That evening I wrote in my journal. She loved him and she missed him, and she was also a person who existed before him and would exist after him, and I think she knew that, but knowing it didn't make it feel less like a wound. I understand that. I've had to know things that didn't feel like what they were. The complication came in the 2nd week, which is when complications always come. Once you've gotten past the first impression, once the immediate newness has worn off and the actual shape of things becomes visible. It came in the form of a man named Carver Holt. Holt was a rancher from the valley east of Callaway Land. Big operation. 3 times the acreage, more money than he needed, and the specific temperament of men who have more than they need and resent anything that isn't under their control. He rode in on a Tuesday morning, uninvited, with 2 men behind him, and he spoke to Alina in the yard as if the yard were his. I was at the barn and could see it without being in it. Holt was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the way that's meant to remind you of the difference. He sat his horse without getting down, which is a particular kind of rudeness. Staying mounted when you're speaking to someone on foot is an old power gesture, and he knew it. And he talked for several minutes with the comfortable loudness of a man who expects to be heard. Alina stood in the yard below him with her arms at her sides, and her expression on the careful neutral side of controlled. I watched Speakstwice appear at the edge of the barn, 15 feet to my left, also watching. "What's the shape of it?" I said quietly. "He wants the North Water rights," Speakstwice said. "He's wanted them for 3 years. He made 2 offers to James, both below value, and James said no both times. Since James died, he's made 4 more. He paused. "She said no 4 more times. And now he's trying something different." He watched Holt gesture at the property around him with the loose wave of a man indicating territory. "He's suggesting that a woman alone running this property is a liability, that he's willing to take some of it off her hands as a kindness." The word kindness sat between us like a wet stone. "She'll refuse again," I said. "She will, but he'll push harder this time." He glanced at me sideways. "He heard there's a new man on the property. He came to look." I understood that. I was being assessed from a distance as a factor, whether I was a threat to Holt's interests, whether I was useful to his narrative about Alina being incapable of managing alone, whether my presence changed his calculations. Alina was speaking now. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the posture, straight-backed, chin-level, voice controlled. Not aggressive, not ceding anything. Holt said something that made his two men shift in their saddles. Alina said something brief. Holt's expression did a thing, a quick tightening around the eyes that was anger managed imperfectly. Then Alina turned and walked back toward the house, and the interview was over. Holt sat his horse for a moment, looked across the yard, and found me. We looked at each other across the distance. He assessed what he saw, a working man, not polished, 43 cents recently, borrowed saddle, and I saw him dismiss it, which was a mistake of the kind that men make when they only look at surfaces. He turned his horse and rode out with his men behind him. I went back to the barn, and a few minutes later Alina appeared in the doorway. "You were watching," she said. "Yes." "Speaks twice, too." "Yes." She leaned against the doorframe. "He'll be back. He always comes back. He's a patient man in the way that men are patient when they believe time is working for them." "Is it?" She looked at the yard. "He thinks it is. He thinks that what's here will get harder to manage, and eventually I'll take whatever he's offering." She paused. "He's wrong about what it takes to run this." "What does it take?" She looked at me. "Someone who shows up," she said simply. "That's it. Everything else is just work, but someone has to show up and keep showing up. James showed up. I show up." She stopped. "You're not sure yet," I said. "I'm not sure yet," she agreed, "but I'm paying attention." There was a long pause in which the barn made its quiet barn sounds, horses breathing, hay settling, pigeons doing something irritating in the rafters. "Alina," I said, and it was the first time I'd used her given name, and we both noticed it. She waited. "I'm not Carver Holt," I said, "and I'm not the men who left because you had opinions. I don't need you to be smaller for me to feel like I fit here." I stopped. "I don't know if I'm what you were describing in the kitchen. I'm not sure I know how to be that yet, but I'm telling you I'm not those other things. I think that might be worth something." She was quiet for a long moment. "It is," she said finally. "It might be worth a lot." She pushed off the doorframe and walked back toward the house, and I noticed for the first time that she walked the way a person walks when they're tired in a deep way, not tired from the day, but tired from the long run of having to be strong when there wasn't anyone reliable to be strong next to. I knew that walk. I'd walked it myself. That night I wrote in my journal, "She is carrying James and Nora and this land and the Northwater rights and Carver Holt and her own opinions, and she is doing it without complaining. I understand that kind of carrying. I've done less of it. I should probably say that somewhere where she can hear it." Also, the roan mare let me touch her shoulder this morning. Took 3 days of standing at the fence without moving. But she let me. Small things are usually the real things. October came with its hands full of cold, and its usual willingness to use them. The north fence was done. The south roof was patched, and the worst of the ridge corrected, 2 inches, as Alina had said, which I noted in my journal and will note again here because she was right, and it would have cost them a winter of water damage if I'd argued instead of listened. The roan mare, whose name turned out to be Feather, Nora had named her, of course, had been examined by a traveling horse doctor out of Santa Fe who confirmed the soft tissue issue I'd suspected, prescribed rest and a specific kind of wrapping, and said she'd be right by spring. 3 of the cattle drives were done before the grass went to nothing. The big sorrel with the hoof crack had seen the farrier and been told he'd be fine with care. The ranch was in better shape than it had been at the beginning of September. That was not me saying so, that was Speaks Twice, who said it to the air in front of him while we were riding a fence line one morning, as if he was making a general observation about the state of things, not complimenting anyone in particular. "I noticed," I told him. "I was talking to myself," he said. "Of course." He adjusted his hat. The mountain ahead of us was beginning to show its first white at the peak, which in this country meant you had 6 weeks before serious weather, 4 if the wind came from the north early. "Nora asked me if you were going to stay," he said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know. I told her that wasn't mine to know." He paused. "She said that wasn't a useful answer." "She's 11. She's old in the ways that matter," he said, and there was something in his voice that was gentle and not a thing I had heard from him before, which meant he was being careful with it. "She was old before her father died. She was already learning to see things clearly. Grief made her sharper, Sharp things can become brittle if they're handled wrong. You're telling me something. I'm observing. What are you observing? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I'd decided he was done talking and had moved on to thinking in that self-contained way he had. Then she brought her father's journal to show me last week. I looked at him. Nora. No, Alina. He kept his eyes on the fence line. James kept a journal. She found it in the back of his desk after he died. She's never shown it to anyone. She brought it to me last week and she said she wanted me to read a particular entry. He paused. The entry was from 3 years before he died. He wrote that the most important thing a person can do for another person is witness them accurately. He said that was what he tried to do for Alina. He said that was the whole of it for him, just to see her correctly and say so. The horses moved slowly along the fence. A cold wind came through the scrub and moved on. Why did she show you that entry? Because, Speakstwice said carefully, she had been thinking about why she trusted you more than the others, and she had come to the conclusion that you see things accurately and say what you see, and she wanted to know if I thought that was the same thing James described. I sat with that for a while. What did you tell her? I told her it was worth finding out. He reined his horse to look at something in the fence, a loose staple, which he stopped to fix with the tools he always carried, which was another thing I'd learned about him. He was always prepared to fix something that needed fixing, regardless of whose job it technically was. When he was done, he straightened up and looked at me. I'm telling you this because you need to know it before the conversation happens, and the conversation is going to happen. When? Tonight, probably. She's been building toward it for a week. He turned his horse back toward the ranch. She's not a woman who circles things. She builds toward them and then she says them. I know. Good, he touched his horse forward. The south fence is going to need that whole third post replaced, not just the wire. Red cedar if you can get it. I know, I said again. Good, he said again, and that was the end of that. Nora found me first, which was fitting because Nora always found me first. She came to the barn at dusk, which was when I was doing the last evening check. Water, feed, locks, condition of each animal. She came in and walked the line of stalls with me the way she'd started doing 2 weeks ago, not because she needed to check on anything, but because it was something we did together now, a habit that had formed without either of us deciding to form it. Feather's wrapping looks good, she said, stopping at the roan's stall. Feather had started letting Nora brush her, which was significant because Feather was still particular about most people. She's improving, I said. You were right about resting her. The horse doctor was right. You knew first, she said it with the firmness of someone correcting the record. You saw it on the first day and said it wasn't a break and wasn't a sprain and that rest was what was needed. The horse doctor confirmed. That's not the same as the horse doctor knowing first. I looked at her, she looked at me. You're right, I said, thank you. You don't have to thank me for being accurate. I know, I'm doing it anyway. She ran her hand along Feather's nose, which the mare accepted. Thomas, she said, and it was the first time she'd used my given name. I noticed that the same way I'd noticed with Alina we both did, and we both knew we'd noticed, and neither of us remarked on it. Are you going to ask Mama something? Are you asking me too? I'm asking you if you're going to. I leaned against the stall divider. I think I might be, I said, if she's. She is, Nora said. She wouldn't have showed Speaks, twice the journal if she wasn't. I looked at this child, this sharp, brittle, careful, brave child in her father's coat, and I thought about the things that get passed down without anyone deciding to pass them. The way of looking, the way of asking questions, the way of carrying loss without letting it erase you. She had all of it from Alina and some of it from James and some of it that was just hers, grown in the specific weather of her own life. Your father's journal, I said. Did you read it? She was quiet for a moment. Some of it. She reads some of it to me sometimes, the parts that are about the ranch and about me. She paused. There's a part she hasn't read me yet. She says I'll understand it better when I'm older. What part? She shook her head. I don't know, she just says when I ask, she says it's the part about what makes a good life. She stroked Feather's nose. She said he got it right. I thought about Speakstwice's description of the entry, and I thought about what it meant that Alina had kept it private, but was now, in her particular way, in her straight-line no-circling way, beginning to share it. I'm going to stay, I told Nora. She didn't look at me. She kept her hand moving along Feather's nose. I know, she said. You were the first one who asked what the horse's name was. When did I? 3 days after you arrived. You were at the South Corral with Speaks Twice and you asked what the roan mare's name was. She glanced at me sideways. Nobody else asked. The other men didn't ask. They saw horses. You saw Feather. She straightened up. Papa always asked names too. She walked out of the barn and I stood in the quiet with the horses breathing their slow, warm breath, and the last of the outside light coming through the upper vent in the way it always did at dusk, golden and fading, and I let that sit with me for a moment. I let it sit without writing it down, which was unusual for me. Some things you write down to keep them. Some things you keep by not writing them because putting them into words makes them smaller than they are. I wrote about that choice later. There are things that shouldn't go in journals, things that are for living and not for reporting. I'm learning the difference. Elena came to find me on the porch of the main house after dinner. Not the kitchen where we'd first spoken. The porch, which is where people go when they're having a conversation they want to be able to look away from, where the view is a help, where the night and the land and the distance give them room. I was already there, which I suppose was its own statement. I had a cup of coffee that was going cold. The temperature had dropped with the sunset, and there was a wood smell in the air from someone's fire somewhere to the south, cottonwood probably, the sweet, clean kind. She came out and stood at the porch rail and looked north. Holt sent a letter, she said. I know Cal mentioned it. He's raised his offer, significantly. She wrapped her arms around herself, not against the cold exactly, it wasn't cold enough for that yet, but in the way people hold themselves when they're thinking through something difficult. It's a fair price now, actually fair, not the charity offer he made before. What are you going to do? Refuse, she said, but it cost me something to decide that this time. When it was a bad offer, refusing was easy. When it's a fair offer, refusing means something else. She paused. It means I believe I can do this without taking the easy way out. And some days I believe that more than others. What about today? Today I believe it, she said. Tomorrow I'll believe it again. The days that are harder are, she stopped, looked at the dark northern field. The days that are hardest are the ones that feel most like grief and least like work. When it feels like work, I know I can do it. When it feels like grief, I'm not always sure. I turned to look at her profile in the porch lamplight, the line of her jaw, the particular set of her shoulders that said she had been strong all day, and was now in the brief hour between putting it down and picking it back up. Elena, I said. She looked at me. I don't know how to do what James did, I said. I'm not going to pretend I do. He knew this land and this life, and he knew you in a way I haven't had the time to learn yet. I can't be what he was. I paused. But I've been thinking about what Speaks Twice told me, about what James wrote, about witnessing someone accurately. She was very still. I think I can do that, I said. I've been doing it for weeks without knowing it was the thing I was doing. I see you, Elena. I see how you run this and what it costs you and what you're afraid of and what you're not afraid of that most people would be. I see Nora. I see what she's carrying and what she's becoming. I stopped. I can't promise you James's way of loving anything. I can promise you I'll keep seeing you clearly and saying what I see, if that's worth something. It's worth something, she said quietly. It's worth a great deal. Then I'd like to stay, formally, not as a hand, not as a foreman, as whoever this turns out to be. I stopped again. I'm not asking tonight. I'm telling you tonight that I'm asking eventually, when you're ready. She looked at me for a long time. In the yellow lamplight, her eyes were that amber color again, the creek-water color, and she looked at me with the expression I'd first seen in the kitchen, the one I'd described in my journal as recognized, but deeper now, more settled into itself. Speak Twice knew you were the one, she said, when you rode through the gate. He told me. I suspected he told you. A small pause. He told me he'd been watching for a man who took his hat off before anyone was watching. That it was the only reliable test he had. He told me he had a guess. He's modest about his guesses. They're usually right. She looked out at the field again. He was right about James. He told James 6 months before James asked me anything that he thought James was a man worth staying near. Did James take that well? He wrote about it in his journal. She almost smiled. He said it was the most terrifying endorsement he'd ever received because it meant he'd been seen before he'd decided to be seen, and he didn't know what to do with that. I thought about 43 cents, and a borrowed saddle and hat off at a gate before you know if anyone's watching. I wrote about this, I said, the first night. In my journal. What did you write? I wrote that I thought I was in trouble. I looked at my cold coffee. I was right, just not in the way I expected. Something in her expression shifted, eased maybe, and then she did something she hadn't done before in all the weeks I'd watched her. She laughed. Not a polished laugh or a controlled one, but an actual, unguarded laugh, brief and real, the kind you can't plan. That's very honest, she said. I try to be. She looked at me, and what passed between us in that moment was not a decision. Decisions are deliberate things, with beginnings and structures, but something more like a recognition. The kind that doesn't need to be named, yet to be real. Speak Twice will want to know what we decide, she said. I know. He'll probably know before we tell him. He always does, she turned toward the door. The south roof held today even with the wind. 2 inches on the ridge, I said. 2 inches, she agreed and opened the door and paused with her hand on the frame. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Alina. The next morning I went to the South Corral at first light to see Feather. She was standing in the center of the pen in the thin early cold, and when I came to the fence she walked toward me on her own. No waiting, no stillness required. She came to the fence and put her nose against my hand and breathed out, warm and steady, and I stood there with my hand against her face and thought about things that take time and are worth it, and that don't announce themselves until they've already happened. Speaks Twice appeared on the fence rail beside me. You talked to her, he said. Alina, not the horse. Yes, and we'll see what we see. He nodded slowly. That's the right answer. You told me the right test, I said, taking the hat off before anyone's watching. I told you what I noticed, he said. The right test tells you who someone is when they think it doesn't matter. That's the only reliable version of them. I looked at the mare. She had moved back a few feet, comfortable now, not needing anything. What do you think James would say, I asked, about me, about all of this? Speaks Twice was quiet for a long time in that deep, considered way of his. He would say, Speaks Twice said finally, that a good life is made of small, honest things done when no one is watching. He would say that witnessing people accurately is the whole of it. He paused. And then he would say something about the north fence needing work because James was also a practical man. I laughed, which surprised both of us slightly. Speaks Twice said, third post, red cedar. I know, I said. I'll get to it this morning. I stood at the fence a little longer with the sun coming fully over the eastern hill and Feather doing nothing in particular in the center of the pen, which is what a horse does when it is finally, after a long time, at ease. That evening I sat with my journal in Breck's old room, my room now, or beginning to be, and I wrote carefully, making the letters smaller than usual because the pages were almost full, and I needed them to last until I could get to a town for another blank book. I wrote 43 cents and a borrowed saddle, and I asked for a job, and she said she was looking for a husband. I thought that was the strange part. The strange part was that she was right. The strange part is that sometimes the thing a person offers you is better than the thing you asked for, and you have to be still enough to see it.